So it's username time. And for that, back in the message bubble, we can make sure that besides outputting the main message, we also output the username of the user who wrote the message. For this, I'll actually wrap text here into a column because I now want to have another text above it. So let's add this text, and this should now be the username. So here I expect a new property, a string, which is the username, and that should also be passed to the message bubble as an argument. So this username should be output here, and we can also set some text style here. And for a start, let's simply set the font weight here to fontweight.bold. So a very simple style. That should show the username above the main text. Now the problem is that at the moment we're not getting this username. In messages, here we are forwarding the text and the check whether it's us or not, but we're not forwarding the username because we don't have the username of the user who created a message. The only thing we have on Firebase for a given message is the ID of the user. We got the dummy IDs and we got the real IDs. Now, actually, to avoid any problems, let's delete all documents with that dummy user ID of A. So I'll quickly delete those 3 documents so that I only have documents, only have messages by real users. So that's the second one. And here's the third one. Still, we only have the user IDs here, not the usernames. And of course, I want to output the real username here and not the ID. Having this here in a chat app would probably not be that useful. Now, of course, we can use the ID to get the username that belongs to it. This is certainly something we can do. And for that, we can forward, let's say, the user ID here to message bubble as a second argument. And in message bubble, change that name to user ID to make it clear that we're actually not getting the username right now, but the user ID. So now we have the user ID here. And in the message bubble, we could now utilize this user ID to fetch the actual username. We could say that we wrap this text here, where we want to output the username, with a stream builder. And then we reach out to the users collection and look for the document with that ID. Now I'll do that, but I'll actually replace stream builder here with future builder because I don't want to set up an ongoing stream. Instead, I'll just want to fetch that username once. There is no need to set up a live listener. It's not going to change because we don't even have a functionality to change a username here. Now, the future here is that we reach out to Firestore, and for that you need to add the import to Cloud Firestore. So we reach out to firestore.instance, and then we reach out to the users collection for a certain user ID. So on that collection, I now use document to point at a certain document, and I want to point at the document with that user ID. Keep in mind that in Firebase, we have a users collection and we have documents where the names or the IDs indeed are our user IDs. So we can look for such a document, and document on its own does not give us a future yet, but we can call get on this, and get will simply get the data of this document, and it will do this through a future. Now then we have our builder where we have our data snapshot here, and that snapshot will eventually hold data about that user. So here we can of course check the snapshot connection state, and if we're still waiting, so if our connection state is waiting, we could return some dummy text where we say loading, something like this. And once we got the actual data, here we output snapshot.data, and that will give us access to this document, and there it's the username field we're interested. So snapshot.data, and then this is a map where we access username like this. If we do this and we save this, indeed we see the username here. Now let's make sure we can also read the text if it's on the accent color background. So for that, I'll set the color of the username to the same color as the message text, like this. And now this is readable. And now maybe also for some alignment to make sure this is not centered like it currently seems to be, we can control this on the column with the cross-axis alignment. And the alignment actually should depend on whether it's by us or not. If it's by us, it should be on the right, so alignment end. If it's by the other user, it should be on the left, so alignment start. So here on the cross-axis alignment of the column, we can check if it's us. And if it is us, I'll set cross-axis alignment end to move it to the right, and otherwise cross-axis alignment start to move it to the left. If we now save that, this looks pretty good. Now, the text should also be aligned to the right. So on the message text, we can add text align and also check if it's me. And if it's me, I'll set text align here to end and otherwise text align to start. And now the message text itself also should be aligned correctly. So that's good. Now we see the username. But this approach has a flaw. And by the way, you don't see it on the left because this is not connected to our development server. This is an old snapshot of the app, which is still running here. But this approach has a flaw here. And do you know which flaw that is? The flaw is that I'm fetching that username here in the message bubble. I'm fetching it with my future builder, which I added here. This one. And that means that for every new message bubble that's being rendered, I reach out to Firebase and I fetch that data. This can be good or bad. This can hammer this API quite a bit. Now the good news is, since this is in a list, it should only fetch the username for the messages that are actually being rendered. And in addition, Firestore also caches data locally. So it's not going to make a million requests here probably. Instead, it should cache data and not send too many requests. Still, this is not something you might want here. You maybe don't want to send a new request for every message bubble that's being rendered. Therefore, we could argue that we don't want to fetch this here, but that instead when we create a message, so when we create a new message here in the new message widget, we want to store the username next to the user ID so that we already have the username here and we don't need to fetch it again. This would mean that we only need to fetch it once when we send this message instead of every time when we render a message. And we could even simplify this more. Theoretically, we could also fetch it once when our application starts up and then store this in some app-wide state or anywhere else, wherever you want. So you can really optimize this quite a bit if you want to. Here, I will fetch it whenever we create a new message. So for that, I'll get my user data by awaiting for a Firestore instance and then reaching out to the users collection for the document with my user ID here, which I get from the user I fetched, and then get. And that's the same I did here in the message bubble. It's the same future, but now I get this here for the user who's sending a message, and on the user data I resolve, for which I wait, I'll be able to get that username, because that is that user document in the user's collection. And now the username is also being stored in every new message which we store in Firestore. Now that means that when we fetch all messages here in the messages widget with the stream builder, those messages will already include the usernames which are fetched, because they will be part of the messages themselves. So that means that now we can just forward username here to our message bubble, because we add such a username field here when we send a message. And therefore in the message bubble, I can rename this back to username, also here. And we can assume that this already is the final username. So now in the message bubble, we can get rid of that future builder here, can get rid of all of that. And instead we just have our text here. Just like this. And we don't have snapshot data username, but we use the username property, which we now have in the message bubble. Now, of course, this won't work with our existing messages, which is why I'm getting an error here, because all those existing chat messages don't have the username field. That's why I'll delete this entire chat collection so that it's going to be recreated. Let's restart the app now. And let's now send a message. Test. And also send one here. And of course, from the left device, I'm still getting an error because I'm running an old version of the app here. So that version doesn't attach the username yet. So I'm quickly going to do this manually. Here in the chat collection, on that document, which doesn't have the username field, I will manually add this field for now to fix this error and set this to Maximilian, for example. Add it, reload the app, and you see that this now works correctly. So that works. We're going to run a more recent version of the app on Android soon too. And with that, we should have a relatively efficient way of storing and fetching the username and displaying the username. Now later we'll also show an image of the user, but for the moment, this is good enough. This is fine like that. So with all of that, we got that finished chat functionality. We can send messages, we can receive messages. This list is updating whenever we get a new message. We got our authentication in place. I would say it is now time to move on to image upload with the Firebase Cloud Storage.